Hello everyone and welcome back to Jessie Kate Creates. Today we're going to be making a really fun neutral craft and white themed Christmas card using this Holiday Spirits stamp set from Avery Elle. I've had this in my stash for a couple years and I haven't really shown it much love, so I figured it was time to breathe some new life into it. So I pulled this out of my stash and I knew I wanted to use it. I wasn't sure how, so I went to the drawing board, quite literally. So I have a notebook where anytime I get an idea for a card, I will go ahead and write it down. And the first idea I had for that stamp set was this one. As you can see, I cannot draw, but this was the loose kind of idea I had that I sketched out in my notebook. You can see here, I wanted these to be, I thought I was going to white emboss these with that Avery Elle stamp set, add a little sentiment here, and that it would be Kraft cardstock with some white stars or white splatter in the background. So this was the idea. And now let me show you the card we're actually going to make today. Ta-da! Pretty close, right? Not exactly the same. There are a couple of things that are a little bit different, and I'll get into that in the video. But if you want to see how I went from this to this, go ahead and keep watching. So jumping right in, I have a panel of Kraft cardstock that measures 5 by 3 3/4. Well, actually it's a little long, but we'll get into that later. And I've arranged my 4 bottles down onto that panel at a little bit of an angle. I decided I was going to make multiples. That's why I'm using a stamp positioner, but if you were just going to make one, you could totally use an acrylic block. Because some of my stamps do overhang the edge of my panel, I lined my panel up at the 1-inch mark, and as long as I put my panel there each time, I know it's going to stamp in the same place. So to stamp these, I'm using this Hero Hues Unicorn White Pigment ink. I just recently started using this ink, but I am really enjoying it. One of the things that's nice about using a stamp positioner is that if you don't get a good impression the first time, you can always stamp it a second time, which is what I'm doing here because that one bottle didn't stamp so well. Now, whenever I'm making multiple cards, I like to do all of the same steps at the same time. So I went ahead and stamped all of my panels, and because this is pigment ink, it does take a little bit to dry, so I just brought in my heat tool to heat set that ink so it would get nice and dry. And heat setting the ink is also going to help prevent me from smudging it. I'm a pretty messy crafter, so I definitely wanted to make sure I didn't get any smudges on my panel. So now I've just taken the stamps from the stamp set that say wishing you plenty of holiday spirits, and I'm getting those lined up on my panel. Now, if you want to get something really straight, it helps to have your head directly over it. So here I'm just taking that whole thing off camera to make sure it's nice and straight. You could also use the lines on your stamp block or the lid of your stamp positioner to make sure things are nice and straight. Because I am going to be heat embossing the sentiment, I just have a little bit of baby powder in just some random cap. And I'm using that to treat my panel before I stamp it with some VersaMark sticky ink. I am going to stamp it twice just to make sure I get a really nice, good impression of my sentiment. And now I'm just going to sprinkle over some white embossing powder. This is just from Michael's. You can use whatever you have on hand. If they're little stray bits, you can try to tap them off or you can wipe them off with a dry paintbrush. And now I'm just going to heat set that with my heat gun. While I was doing my stamping, I did have my heat gun getting nice and hot in the background. So here we can see all of the panels have been stamped and embossed, and I just really like the way the bottles are a little bit more matte and understated, and the sentiment is a more crisp, intense white. I think it just makes the sentiment really pop. Now I wanted to add a little something something to the bottles, so I decided I'd keep it really simple and just add a shadow. I'm not coloring in the whole bottles, just adding in a little shadow. And I wanted it to be very tone on tone. So I just took some scraps of this cardstock and put down a few different markers to see what color I liked the best. I ended up going with this random soft brown marker. I thought it looked really nice, just slightly darker than the cardstock itself. Now, when this first goes down, it does look very dark, but it is going to dry back just a little bit. Now for this, I wasn't following any rules. I wasn't thinking about what the light source would be and where it would be coming from, so where the shadows are. You could totally do that. I didn't. I was just kind of having fun with this, and I just added these little shadows wherever I liked it or wherever I thought it looked good, or if there was just something on the bottle that I really wanted to emphasize. Um, that's one of the things that I really like about crafting is you can have fun with it and you can do whatever looks good or whatever feels good to you. Um, I doubt that a recipient of this card is going to be like, oh, nope, she got the light sources wrong. This card is ruined. I don't even want it anymore. People really aren't thinking about it as much as usually we're thinking about things when we make our cards. Not that there's anything wrong with thinking about it, but it's just nice to think about that and take that pressure off yourself when you're crafting sometimes. So I'm just going through and finishing up adding all of the lines to this bottle. And y'all, this is really simple. You're just tracing those little white lines that you already stamped down. You don't have to worry about coloring in the bottles or shading them. You totally could. I think that would look awesome. But if you just want something really simple to add a little bit of punch to an image, this is a good way to do it. So here I have added the shadows to all of my bottles. And at this point, we are going to, let's see, we're going to look at our sketch. So initially I had white splatter or stars in the background. And I really thought I was going to do white splatter, but quite frankly, you guys, I didn't feel like doing splatter. I didn't feel like mixing up paint or inks and getting out a splat box. I didn't want to do any of that. So I was like, you know what? What can I do instead? We can use a gel pen. That's the other thing about crafting. You can always find, well, for the most part, you can find an alternative way to get the look you were going for. In my case, I decided I'd rather use a white gel pen. This is going to take longer than if I decided to do some splattering, but I was okay with that. I just kind of had a YouTube video on that I was really enjoying, and I just added my little dots of snow to the background while watching my video. You might have also noticed that on some of the bottles, I added little dots of snow right to the edge of the bottle, and that's just because I wanted it to look like the bottles were in front of the snow, so it just looks like the snow is falling behind the bottles. So once I'd added all my snow, I decided I wanted to clean up some of the lines on my bottles. I just had some places where my marker went over the stamped edge of the bottle. So to fix that, I just took my white gel pen and I'm just coloring over that line. You definitely don't have to do this. This is definitely me being a little bit extra here, as I tend to do. But I wanted to do it, so I did. Again, no one's going to notice if you skip over this step. So once I had cleaned up all of my panels, I decided to add foam tape to the back, and then I went ahead and set those panels aside. To work on the inside of the card, I just have this Happy Holidays stamp. This is from an old Recollections stamp set. I have a panel of white cardstock that is 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm just stamping this down on the middle of my panels using some Concord and Ninth wheat ink because that's the closest ink I have to a Kraft colored ink. So I decided to dress up the inside of the cards. I would second generation stamp a bottle from the stamp set. So I stamp it off onto scratch paper and then stamp the lighter image onto my panel. And now I'm just going to adhere these panels to the inside of my card base using some dry adhesive. So there we go. With the insides done, I'm going to add the front panels to my cards. And here I noticed that I didn't cut my panels correctly. They're a little bit too long. I need to trim a 1/4 inch off of either the top or the bottom of my panel. So I went ahead and did that off camera. That looks much better with an even border. And now I'm just going to adhere that onto my card base. And I think that because they have like a more simple feel to them, I think the dimension makes a big difference on these cards. So there we go. I'm just going to adhere that on. I think that looks really good. So I'll press it down. And here's where I decided I wanted to add a little something more to the cards. They didn't look quite finished. So I just took my glitter brush pen and I am just adding some glitter to all of the little accents on the bottle. So like the bows and the leaves and little Santa hat. And I love that. I love the sparkle it adds to the card. So here the card is complete, but it's here that I'm like, wait, there's one more thing I want to do while I still have everything out. Coordinating envelopes. So I just took another bottle from the stamp set. I have some Kraft colored envelopes and I just stamped that bottle down using the wheat ink. And just like that, we have 3 A2 cards and matching envelopes. I had a lot of fun making these cards. Let me know what you think about them in the comments below. Do you like the limited color scheme or do you like using more colors on your Christmas cards? Thank you guys so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.